The champagne flute trembled in my hand as I stood at the microphone, 300 faces staring up at me from the decorated ballroom floor. David's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to confusion, then to something approaching terror as I pulled the leather portfolio from behind the podium. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice steady despite the chaos of the past year. I have an announcement that will change Sterling Digital Solutions forever. David shot to his feet from the head table, Amanda's hand falling away from his arm. Rachel, what are you doing? I smiled, the same smile I'd perfected through 12 years of marriage and business partnership, but now it carried a different weight entirely. I'm exercising my rights as the majority shareholder of this company. As of this morning, I own 73% of Sterling Digital Solutions. The silence that followed was deafening. David's face went white as I continued. Which means, effective immediately, you're fired. But let me back up. Because the story of how a humiliated wife became a corporate predator starts 8 months earlier, with a discovery that would change everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the company we built together. It was a Tuesday morning in January when my perfectly constructed world began to crumble, though I wouldn't understand the full scope of the destruction for months. I was in David's home office, searching for our tax documents from the previous year, when I knocked over a stack of papers on his usually immaculate desk. As I gathered them up, a bank statement caught my eye, not from our joint accounts, but from something called Sterling Holdings LLC. The numbers made my stomach lurch. Monthly deposits of $25,000, sometimes more, dating back 3 years. The account balance showed nearly $2 million that I knew nothing about. David Sterling, my husband of 12 years and business partner since we founded Sterling Digital Solutions together, had been funneling money into a secret account. I photographed the statement with shaking hands and carefully repositioned everything exactly as I'd found it. That evening over dinner, I watched David talk about his day, compliment the salmon I'd prepared, ask about my upcoming presentation to the Morrison Group, our biggest potential client. He was the same man I'd fallen in love with at Portland State University, the same ambitious dreamer who'd convinced me to leave my stable marketing job at Nike to start our own agency. Yet sitting across from him at our dining room table in Lake Oswego, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. Sterling Digital Solutions had been our shared vision from the beginning. Fresh out of college, David had the technical expertise and I had the marketing background. We pooled our savings, worked 18-hour days from our cramped apartment, and slowly built something extraordinary. By our 5th year, we were Portland's fastest-growing digital marketing firm. By our 10th, we were competing with agencies in Seattle and San Francisco. The company had always been structured as a partnership. David held 45%, I held 45%, and we'd sold small stakes to key employees and early investors to raise capital and retain talent. Marcus Rivera, our CFO, held 3%. James Morrison, who'd given us our first major contract and later joined our board, held 2%. Various employees and contractors held the remaining 5% in tiny fractions. It was the perfect setup for a husband and wife team. Equal partners in business and in life, or so I believed. The discovery of the secret account gnawed at me through the following weeks. I began paying attention to details I'd previously overlooked. Phone calls that David would take in private. Weekend trips to the office that seemed unnecessary. Late nights that he attributed to client emergencies but never seemed to result in new business or crisis management. Our relationship had evolved over the years from passionate newlyweds to comfortable partners. We rarely fought, but we also rarely talked about anything deeper than business strategies and weekend plans. David traveled frequently for client meetings and industry conferences. I managed the day-to-day operations and our largest accounts. We were efficient, successful, and emotionally distant in a way that I'd convinced myself was mature partnership. The first crack in our professional facade came during the Morrison Group presentation in February. This was the contract that would take Sterling Digital Solutions to the next level. A 5-year, $15 million partnership with one of the Pacific Northwest's largest retail chains. I'd spent months developing the strategy, building the pitch deck, and coordinating with our creative team. The presentation went flawlessly. James Morrison and his team were impressed with our comprehensive approach to their digital transformation. As we wrapped up, Morrison pulled me aside and said something that stuck with me. "Rachel, this is exactly the kind of innovative thinking that made me invest in Sterling originally. You're the strategic mind behind this company's success." That evening, David and I celebrated at our favorite restaurant in the Pearl District. Over wine, he seemed unusually focused on the financial aspects of the Morrison deal. $15 million over 5 years, he mused. That's going to require significant infrastructure investment up front. The revenue projections account for that, I replied. We'll need to hire 12 new people and upgrade our server capacity, but the margins work out beautifully by year 2. David nodded, but something in his expression bothered me. He looked calculating rather than celebratory, as if he were working through a problem I wasn't aware of. 2 weeks later, Marcus Rivera requested a private meeting. Marcus had been with us since year 3, recruited from a larger agency where he'd been undervalued despite his exceptional financial acumen. He was meticulous, ethical, and had never given me reason to doubt his loyalty to the company. We met at a quiet cafe near Pioneer Courthouse Square. Marcus looked uncomfortable, stirring his coffee repeatedly before speaking. "Rachel, I need to talk to you about some financial irregularities I've discovered." My heart rate spiked, but I kept my voice level. "What kind of irregularities?" "David's been making transfers to Sterling Holdings LLC without board approval or proper documentation. It started small 3 years ago, but it's escalated significantly. Last quarter alone, he moved $400,000. I feigned surprise while my mind raced. "Are you certain? Maybe it's a tax strategy or investment vehicle I'm not aware of." Marcus shook his head grimly. "I've asked him about it twice. The first time he said it was temporary cash management. The second time he told me to focus on my own responsibilities and not worry about executive decisions. What are you suggesting?" "I think David is siphoning money from the company, potentially preparing for something big, maybe a buyout attempt or planning to start a competing firm." The possibility hadn't occurred to me, but it made terrifying sense. If David was planning to leave Sterling Digital Solutions, he'd want to take as much capital as possible. More disturbing was the implication that he'd been planning this betrayal for years while maintaining the facade of partnership. "Marcus, I need you to document everything you can without alerting David. Can you do that discreetly?" He nodded solemnly. "Rachel, there's something else. The Morrison Group contract. David's been having private conversations with their team. I think he's trying to position himself as the primary contact, cutting you out of the relationship." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while David slept peacefully beside me. 12 years of marriage, 12 years of building a business together, and apparently he'd been systematically undermining both for at least 3 years. The man I'd trusted with my heart, my dreams, and my financial future had been playing a long game that I was only beginning to understand. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Helen Brooks, Portland's most formidable corporate attorney, whom I'd met at various business networking events. The second was to Tom Bradley, a private investigator who specialized in corporate fraud and marital infidelity. Helen's office occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise with panoramic views of the Cascade Mountains. She listened to my story without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her leather chair and studied me carefully. "Rachel, what you're describing could constitute several forms of fraud if we can prove intent to deceive and personal benefit. But we need more evidence before we can take any legal action. What kind of evidence? Bank records, email communications, witness testimony. Anything that shows David deliberately concealed material information from you as his business partner. Oregon partnership law is very specific about fiduciary duties between partners. She explained that, as equal partners, David owed me complete financial transparency. Any secret accounts or undisclosed business activities could be grounds for dissolution of the partnership and recovery of damages. More importantly, if he was planning to freeze me out of the Morrison Group contract or other major accounts, that could constitute tortious interference with business relationships. Tom Bradley operated from a modest office near Lloyd Center, but his credentials were impressive. Former FBI white-collar crime investigator, 25 years of experience, and a reputation for uncovering financial deception that had earned him referrals from half the divorce attorneys in Portland. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Corporate fraud cases like this often have personal components, he explained during our initial meeting. Men who steal from their business partners frequently have other secrets. Are you prepared for what we might discover about your husband's private life? I thought about the late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the gradual emotional distance between us. I need to know the truth, whatever it is. Tom's investigation began immediately. Within a week, he'd traced the Sterling Holdings LLC account to a web of financial activity that painted a disturbing picture. David had been systematically diverting funds not just to the secret account, but to personal investments, luxury purchases, and regular payments to someone named Amanda Walsh. Amanda Walsh worked at Sterling Digital Solutions. She was 29, hired 8 months earlier as a junior marketing coordinator, and according to Tom's surveillance, spending an unusual amount of time with my husband both during and after business hours. The photographs Tom provided were damning. David and Amanda at an expensive restaurant in the West Hills. David and Amanda entering a downtown apartment building where she lived. David and Amanda at the coast for what appeared to be a romantic weekend while I thought he was at a client meeting in Seattle. But the most devastating discovery came when Tom accessed David's credit card records through legal channels Helen had arranged. Jewelry purchases, luxury hotel stays, expensive dinners. All the classic patterns of a man maintaining a mistress. The amounts were staggering. Over the past year alone, David had spent nearly $60,000 of company money on Amanda. I sat in Helen's office reviewing the evidence, feeling my carefully constructed life disintegrating page by page. He's been stealing from our company to fund an affair with an employee. It gets worse, Helen said grimly. Tom discovered that Amanda Walsh has been given access to client files and strategic documents far beyond her job description. She's attended client meetings, traveled to conferences, and has been positioned as David's assistant on major accounts. The implication was clear. David wasn't just having an affair, he was grooming Amanda to replace me in the business. She was being trained on our most valuable client relationships, given insider knowledge of our strategic plans, and positioned to transition seamlessly into my role when David inevitably pushed me out. What are my options? I asked. Helen's smile was predatory. More than David realizes. First, we can pursue criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. Second, we can seek dissolution of the partnership with damages. Third, and most interestingly, we can explore acquiring additional shares in Sterling Digital Solutions. The last option intrigued me. Helen explained that several of our minority shareholders might be willing to sell their stakes, particularly if they learned about David's financial improprieties. Marcus Rivera was already concerned about the company's direction. James Morrison valued ethical leadership above all else. If I could acquire enough shares to gain control of the company, I could remove David entirely rather than simply seeking financial compensation. It would be expensive, Helen warned. You'd need to buy shares at a premium to convince people to sell quickly and quietly. How expensive? Conservatively, $3 to $4 million to acquire a controlling interest. I did some quick calculations. Our house in Lake Oswego was worth $2 million with only $300,000 remaining on the mortgage. My retirement accounts totaled nearly $600,000. I had personal savings of $200,000. It would require liquidating everything I owned, but it was possible. More importantly, I remembered something David didn't know I knew. 5 years earlier, my grandmother had left me a trust fund that I'd never touched. The trust was structured to provide income over time, but it also allowed for principal distribution under specific circumstances, including business investment opportunities. The trust held, too, $8 million that David had never known about, because I'd received the inheritance shortly before my grandmother specifically requested that I not discuss it with anyone, including my husband, until I was certain of my financial security. At the time, I'd thought her request was paranoid. Now I understood it was prophetic. Over the following weeks, Tom's surveillance revealed the full scope of David's deception. The affair with Amanda had been ongoing for 10 months, beginning shortly after she was hired. David had been systematically moving company resources to support not just their relationship, but Amanda's career advancement. She'd been promoted twice in 8 months, each time receiving responsibilities and access far beyond her experience level. More disturbing were the recordings Tom had obtained of their conversations. Amanda wasn't just a naive employee swept up in an affair with her boss. She was an active participant in planning my professional downfall. In one recording, she laughed about how clueless Rachel is about what's coming and discussed taking over my client relationships after David makes his move. The final piece of evidence came from Marcus Rivera, who had continued his discreet investigation of the company's finances. David had been preparing for months to present the board with a proposal to restructure Sterling Digital Solutions. The Gisan restructuring would effectively buy out my partnership stake at a fraction of its true value while consolidating David's control. Amanda Walsh would be named Vice President of Client Relations, taking over my role and responsibilities. David had scheduled the board meeting for December 20th, 5 days after the annual Christmas party. He'd planned to announce the restructuring as a fait accompli, using his charm and Amanda's manufactured client relationships to convince the board that this was a natural evolution of the company's leadership. What David didn't know was that I'd spent the previous 6 months quietly acquiring shares from every minority stakeholder in Sterling Digital Solutions. Marcus had sold me his 3% immediately after learning about David's financial improprieties. James Morrison, appalled by the breach of fiduciary duty, sold me his 2% and agreed to help me acquire others. One by one, I'd approached employees and small investors, offering premium prices for their stakes in exchange for absolute confidentiality. By November, I owned 51% of Sterling Digital Solutions. By early December, I'd reached 73%. David Sterling, the man who'd stolen from our company to fund his affair and planned to steal my professional identity, was about to discover that his wife had become his boss. The Christmas party was scheduled for December 15th at the Nines Hotel in downtown Portland. It was our annual celebration, a chance for the entire Sterling Digital Solutions team to come together and celebrate another successful year. David had personally selected the venue and planned the evening, including a special announcement that he'd told me would recognize our evolving leadership structure. I knew exactly what that announcement would contain. What David didn't know was that I had an announcement of my own planned, one that would change everything forever. As I prepared for the party that evening, choosing a sleek black dress that projected confidence and authority, I reflected on how much I'd changed over the past year. The naive woman who'd discovered that mysterious bank statement had evolved into someone far more strategic, far more dangerous. David had underestimated me completely, assuming that 12 years of comfortable partnership had made me complacent and dependent. He was about to learn how wrong he'd been. The Christmas party at the Nines Hotel was everything David had envisioned. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the elegantly decorated ballroom, where our 150 employees mingled with clients and industry partners. The company had spared no expense, which I now understood was funded partly by the money David had been systematically stealing from our accounts. I arrived fashionably late, making my entrance in the black Armani dress I'd purchased specifically for this evening. Conversations paused as I moved through the crowd, accepting compliments and engaging in the small talk that had become second nature after years of company events. What no one knew was that I was mentally cataloging every person in the room, identifying allies and potential obstacles for what was about to unfold. David stood near the bar with Amanda, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. She wore a stunning red dress that I recognized from the credit card statements Tom had uncovered. My husband had spent $3,500 on that dress, charging it to the company as a client entertainment expense. The audacity was breathtaking, but I'd learned to appreciate David's arrogance. It had made him careless, and his carelessness had given me the ammunition I needed. Our eyes met across the room, and David raised his champagne glass in a mock toast. He thought he was celebrating his upcoming victory, the moment when he would announce my professional demise to our entire company. His smile was confident, almost gleeful, as if he were savoring the anticipation of my humiliation. Marcus Rivera approached me near the dessert table, his expression carefully neutral. "Everything ready for tonight?" he asked quietly. "Every detail has been arranged," I replied, sampling a chocolate truffle while maintaining my composure. "How do you think the staff will react?" "They trust you, Rachel. Most of them have suspected something was wrong for months. David's behavior has been increasingly erratic, and Amanda's rapid promotions haven't gone unnoticed." This was true. I'd spent weeks having discreet conversations with key employees, not revealing my plans but gauging their loyalty and concerns. What I'd discovered was that David's affair wasn't as secret as he believed. Office relationships rarely stay hidden, especially when they involve preferential treatment and obvious favoritism. Jennifer Kim, our lead graphic designer, had confided that Amanda frequently received assignments that should have gone to more senior staff. Robert Chen, our senior account manager, mentioned that David had been excluding him from client meetings while including Amanda despite her lack of experience. The pattern was clear to anyone paying attention, and our employees weren't stupid. The evening progressed according to David's carefully orchestrated plan. Dinner was served at 7, followed by the traditional awards ceremony recognizing outstanding employees. David played the role of benevolent CEO perfectly, praising team achievements and projecting the image of a company leader who valued every contribution. At 9 o'clock, he took the microphone for what everyone expected would be his standard end-of-year address. The room quieted as David began speaking about Sterling Digital Solutions' remarkable growth, our expansion into new markets, and the exciting opportunities ahead. "This year has been transformative for our company," he announced, his voice carrying the polished confidence of a man accustomed to being the center of attention. "We've signed our largest contract ever with the Morrison Group, expanded our team by 30%, and positioned ourselves as the premier digital marketing firm in the Pacific Northwest." Polite applause rippled through the audience. I stood near the back of the room, champagne glass in hand, watching David perform for what would be the last time as CEO of the company we'd built together. "Success of this magnitude requires evolution," David continued, and I could hear the shift in his tone that signaled the beginning of his planned announcement. "It requires making difficult decisions about leadership structure and organizational efficiency." This was the moment. David was about to reveal his restructuring plan, the scheme that would force me out while elevating Amanda to my position. He'd rehearsed this speech, probably with Amanda's input, crafting it to sound like a natural business evolution rather than the calculated betrayal it actually represented. After extensive consideration and consultation with our board of directors, David lied smoothly, since no such consultation had occurred, I'm pleased to announce significant changes to Sterling Digital Solutions' executive structure. The quiet room grew quieter, sensing that something important was about to be revealed. I noticed several board members looking confused, which confirmed that David was implementing his plan without proper authorization. Effective January 1st, we'll be streamlining our leadership to better serve our clients and stakeholders. As part of this restructuring, Rachel Sterling will be transitioning away from her operational role to focus on new opportunities outside the company. A murmur of surprise swept through the audience. Many employees looked shocked, turning to locate me in the crowd. David's announcement was carefully worded to sound voluntary, but anyone with business experience understood what was happening. I was being forced out. Additionally, I'm excited to announce that Amanda Walsh will be promoted to Vice President of Client Relations, taking over management of our key accounts and strategic partnerships. Amanda stepped forward, accepting congratulations with practiced grace. She'd prepared for this moment, probably rehearsing her acceptance speech with David. Her smile was radiant as she took the microphone he offered her. "Thank you, David," she began, her voice steady despite what must have been incredible nervousness. "I'm honored by this opportunity and excited to lead Sterling Digital Solutions into the next phase of growth. Rachel has done an admirable job building our client relationships, and I look forward to taking them to even greater heights." The condescension in her tone was subtle, but unmistakable. She was positioning herself as my superior replacement, suggesting that my work had been merely adequate while hers would be exceptional. It was a masterful performance of professional backstabbing disguised as gracious acknowledgement. David reclaimed the microphone, beaming with satisfaction. "I'd also like to announce that Rachel and I have made the difficult decision to end our marriage. While this is personally challenging, we're committed to ensuring a smooth transition that protects the company and our employees." The room fell silent. David had just publicly announced our divorce without my consent or knowledge, using our company Christmas party as his platform. The humiliation was calculated and complete. He'd not only fired me professionally, but also discarded me personally, doing both in front of everyone we'd worked with for years. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me, searching for my reaction. Some faces showed sympathy, others curiosity. A few barely concealed satisfaction from people who'd never liked me. David's smile was triumphant as he waited for my response, expecting tears or protests or a dramatic exit that would confirm his narrative of an unstable woman who couldn't handle professional and personal rejection. Instead, I began to clap. Slowly, deliberately, maintaining eye contact with David as I applauded his performance. The sound echoed strangely in the quiet ballroom, drawing confused looks from the audience who couldn't understand why I was celebrating my own professional execution. "Bravo, David," I called out, my voice carrying clearly across the room. "That was quite a performance. May I?" I gestured toward the microphone, and David's expression shifted from triumph to uncertainty. He'd expected emotional collapse, not composed confidence. After a moment's hesitation, he handed me the microphone, probably curious about what final humiliation I might inflict upon myself. I walked to the front of the room with measured steps, my heels clicking against the marble floor. The audience watched with fascination, unsure whether they were about to witness a breakdown or a counterattack. When I reached the microphone, I paused to look around the room, making eye contact with key employees and board members. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice steady and professional. David is absolutely right that this has been a transformative year for Sterling Digital Solutions. What he hasn't told you is just how transformative it's been. David's face began to change as he realized I wasn't following his script. Amanda looked confused, glancing between David and me as if trying to understand what was happening. See, while David has been making plans for the company's future, I've been making some plans of my own. And I have a few announcements that I think will interest everyone here tonight. I reached into my purse and withdrew the leather portfolio I'd prepared, containing the documents that would change everything. David took a step forward, as if to stop me, but James Morrison caught his arm and shook his head. Whatever was about to happen, it would happen. First, I'd like to address David's assertion that I'll be transitioning away from Sterling Digital Solutions. That's not entirely accurate. I opened the portfolio and removed the first document. As of this morning, I am the majority shareholder of this company, owning 73% of all outstanding shares. The silence that followed was absolute. David's face went pale as the implications registered. Amanda looked confused, clearly not understanding the significance of what I'd just revealed. What this means, I continued, enjoying the moment immensely, is that I have controlling interest in Sterling Digital Solutions. I am effectively David's boss. And as the majority shareholder, I have some executive decisions to announce. David found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. I smiled at him with genuine warmth for the first time in months. David, you know what you never learned about me in 12 years of marriage? I'm much smarter than you gave me credit for, and significantly more resourceful. I turned back to the audience, many of whom were recording this exchange on their phones. By tomorrow, this confrontation would be viral within Portland's business community. David Sterling, effective immediately, you are terminated as CEO of Sterling Digital Solutions for gross misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, and embezzlement of company funds. I removed another document from the portfolio. Security will escort you from the premises tonight, and you are banned from company property pending criminal investigation. The transformation in David's face was remarkable. Confidence dissolved into shock, then panic, as he realized the magnitude of what was happening. He'd been outmaneuvered completely. His carefully planned coup turned into his own public destruction. Amanda Walsh, I continued, turning my attention to David's mistress. You are also terminated, effective immediately, for accepting bribes, participating in fraud, and engaging in unethical conduct with a superior. Amanda's composure finally cracked. You can't do this. David and I have done nothing wrong. Actually, I can do exactly this. And David has done quite a lot wrong. I withdrew a thick folder from the portfolio. Would you like me to detail the evidence publicly, or would you prefer to leave quietly? David made one final attempt to regain control. Rachel, you're making a mistake. These people invested in me, not you. Without me, this company will collapse. The laughter that escaped me was genuine and probably sounded slightly unhinged to the audience. David, these people invested in Sterling Digital Solutions, a company that I built just as much as you did. The difference is that I've spent the last year proving I can run it better than you ever did. I turned to address the room directly. Everyone here will keep their jobs. Sterling Digital Solutions will continue operating without interruption. The Morrison Group contract will proceed as planned under my direct management, and I promise you that this company will be run with the integrity and transparency that you deserve. Marcus Rivera began applauding, followed quickly by Jennifer Kim and Robert Chen. Within moments, most of the room was clapping, though whether from genuine support or simple shock was unclear. Security arrived at that moment, summoned by a discreet text I'd sent earlier. Two professional guards approached David and Amanda, who stood frozen in their formal wear like actors who'd forgotten their lines. Gentlemen, I addressed the security team, please escort Mr. Sterling and Ms. Walsh from the premises. They are no longer employees of Sterling Digital Solutions. David's final words as security led him away were predictable. You'll regret this, Rachel. I'll sue you for everything you've stolen from me. David, I called after him, you might want to consult with a criminal attorney before you start making threats. Tom Bradley's investigation uncovered quite a bit of interesting evidence about your financial activities. The mention of a private investigator was the final blow. David's face went white as he realized the full scope of my preparation. He'd been caught completely off guard by an opponent he'd underestimated entirely. As the ballroom door closed behind them, I turned back to the microphone for my final announcement of the evening. Ladies and gentlemen, Sterling Digital Solutions has had quite an eventful year, but I promise you that our best days are ahead of us. Thank you for your patience during tonight's unexpected drama, and I look forward to leading this company into a new era of success. The applause that followed was thunderous, though I suspected it was partly relief that the confrontation was over. As employees began approaching me with congratulations and questions, I reflected on how perfectly the evening had unfolded. David had orchestrated his own destruction by choosing the Christmas party as his venue for humiliating me. Instead of witnessing my professional demise, our entire company had seen him exposed as a fraud and criminal. The public nature of his downfall ensured that word would spread quickly throughout Portland's business community, making it nearly impossible for him to rebuild his reputation or career. Marcus Rivera approached me as the crowd began to thin. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since the day I discovered his secret bank account," I replied honestly. "Every move he made after that just gave me more ammunition." "What happens next?" I smiled, feeling genuinely optimistic for the first time in months. "Next, we run the best digital marketing company in the Pacific Northwest. Without David's ego and Amanda's incompetence dragging us down, we're going to exceed every goal we've ever set." The Christmas party continued for another hour, but the energy had completely shifted. Instead of celebrating David's announcement, employees were processing the dramatic reversal they'd witnessed. Many approached me privately to express support and share their own concerns about David's recent behavior. What struck me most was how many people had suspected something was wrong but hadn't felt comfortable speaking up. David's affair with Amanda hadn't been as discreet as they'd believed. His financial irregularities had been noticed by several department heads. His increasingly erratic management style had concerned multiple employees. I realized that David's downfall hadn't been caused solely by my investigation and planning. He'd been undermining himself for months through his own arrogance and carelessness. My role had been to accelerate and publicize his self-destruction, not to create it from nothing. As the evening wound down and employees began leaving, I stood, alone in the ballroom where my professional life had just been transformed. 12 years of marriage and business partnership had ended in spectacular fashion, but I felt no sadness or regret. David had chosen his path when he decided to steal from our company and betray our partnership. I had simply ensured that his choices had appropriate consequences. The real work would begin tomorrow. Running Sterling Digital Solutions as majority owner would require different skills than being an equal partner. I would need to rebuild trust with employees, reassure clients about the company's stability, and prove that my leadership could deliver the results David had promised but failed to achieve. But tonight, I allowed myself to savor the victory. David Sterling had tried to destroy me professionally and personally, using our company Christmas party as his weapon of choice. Instead, he had provided the perfect stage for his own downfall and my triumphant emergence as the leader Sterling Digital Solutions had always needed. The morning after the Christmas party, I arrived at Sterling Digital Solutions headquarters at 6:30, 2 hours before the official start of business. The downtown Portland high-rise was quiet except for the custodial staff and a few early arriving employees from other companies. I needed time to prepare for what would undoubtedly be the most challenging day in my professional career. My first task was reviewing the termination paperwork Helen Brooks had prepared for David and Amanda. Both documents were legally bulletproof, citing specific instances of misconduct that Tom Bradley's investigation had uncovered. David's termination listed embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, misuse of company resources, and violation of the company's ethics policy regarding romantic relationships with subordinates. Amanda's termination focused on accepting bribes in the form of unearned promotions and gifts, participating in fraudulent activities, and violating workplace conduct standards. By 7:15, my phone began ringing. The first call came from James Morrison, whose early morning routine apparently included checking business news. "Rachel, I just saw the preliminary reports about last night. Are you prepared for the media attention this is going to generate?" "Good morning, James. Yes, I've been expecting increased scrutiny. Helen Brooks has prepared a media strategy that focuses on Sterling Digital Solutions' continued stability and growth under new leadership." "Smart approach. What about the employees? How are they handling the transition?" "I'm about to find out. I've called an all-hands meeting for 9 o'clock to address concerns and outline our path forward." James chuckled appreciatively. "David, always underestimated your strategic thinking. I'm glad I sold you my shares when you approached me. This company is in much better hands now." The second call came from Tom Bradley, whose surveillance work had provided the foundation for everything that transpired the previous evening. "Rachel, you should know that David contacted me at midnight last night, offering to pay double my fee if I'd claim my investigation was fabricated." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that integrity isn't negotiable and that attempting to suborn perjury is a felony. I also mentioned that all evidence has been secured with proper chain of custody documentation. This confirmed what I'd suspected about David's post-party strategy. Rather than accepting responsibility for his actions, he would attempt to discredit the evidence and portray himself as the victim of a vindictive ex-wife. It was a predictable response that Helen had already prepared for. By 8 o'clock, employees began arriving for work, many looking uncertain about what they might find. The security team I'd hired had worked through the night to change all access codes and retrieve David's company equipment. His office had been sealed pending the completion of our internal audit and the criminal investigation that would inevitably follow. Marcus Rivera arrived early, as I'd expected, carrying a laptop bag and wearing the determined expression of someone prepared for battle. "How bad is the fallout going to be?" "Professionally, we'll be fine. I've already spoken with our 3 largest clients to assure them of continuity. The Morrison Group is particularly pleased that I'll be personally managing their account going forward." "And legally?" "Helen expects David will file for an injunction claiming wrongful termination and attempt to freeze company assets. We're prepared for that. Tom's evidence is comprehensive, and our documentation is thorough." What I didn't tell Marcus was the most disturbing discovery from Tom's investigation. The financial fraud extended far beyond David's affair with Amanda. Over the past 3 years, he'd been systematically overcharging clients and keeping the difference, falsifying expense reports to cover personal purchases, and using company credit for transactions that had nothing to do with business operations. The total amount of David's theft exceeded $800,000, not including the money he'd spent on Amanda. He'd been building a war chest for his planned departure from Sterling Digital Solutions, intending to start a competing firm with stolen capital and client relationships he'd cultivated using company resources. More troubling was evidence that David had been sharing confidential client information with industry competitors in exchange for referral fees. The Morrison Group contract, which I'd developed and negotiated, had been discussed with 3 other agencies before we'd even signed the agreement. David had been hedging his bets, ensuring he'd have options regardless of how his coup attempt played out. At 8:30, Amanda Walsh arrived at the building, apparently unaware that her access privileges had been revoked. Security intercepted her in the lobby, informing her that she was no longer employed and directing her to retrieve personal items under supervision. I watched from my office window as she argued with the guards, her professional composure finally cracking completely. Tom Bradley had discovered that Amanda's hiring hadn't been coincidental. She'd applied for positions at Sterling Digital Solutions repeatedly over the past 2 years, despite being underqualified for every role. Her persistence suggested a deliberate strategy to infiltrate the company, though whether this was related to her romantic pursuit of David or some other agenda remained unclear. What was clear was that Amanda had been feeding David information about employee concerns and client feedback that she'd gathered through casual conversations. She'd positioned herself as a confidant to several junior employees, encouraging them to share frustrations about management decisions and company policies. David had used this intelligence to identify potential supporters for his restructuring plan. The all-hands meeting began promptly at 9 o'clock in our largest conference room. Every employee was present, from senior managers to recent hires, creating a packed room with an atmosphere of nervous anticipation. I'd prepared remarks that would address the obvious questions while maintaining professional discretion about the personal aspects of the situation. Good morning, everyone. I know last night's events were unexpected, and I appreciate your patience as we navigate this transition. I paused to make eye contact with employees throughout the room. Sterling Digital Solutions remains financially stable, operationally sound, and committed to the same high standards of service that have made us successful. Jennifer Kim raised her hand immediately. Rachel, what does this mean for our current projects and client relationships? All projects will continue without interruption. Client relationships will be managed by the same account teams, with enhanced oversight to ensure seamless service delivery. The Morrison Group has already confirmed their confidence in our ability to execute their contract under my direct leadership. Robert Chen looked concerned as he asked, will there be layoffs or restructuring beyond David and Amanda's terminations? No layoffs are planned. Our staffing levels are appropriate for our current workload, and we're actually exploring expansion opportunities that could create additional positions. The questions continued for 30 minutes, covering everything from Christmas bonuses to summer vacation policies. What impressed me was the professionalism and maturity of the staff's concerns. Rather than gossip about personal drama, they focused on practical implications for their jobs and careers. Sarah Mitchell, one of our newest hires, asked the question I'd been expecting. Rachel, are you concerned about David starting a competing firm? David's professional options are significantly limited by legal constraints that I can't discuss in detail. What I can tell you is that Sterling Digital Solutions holds comprehensive non-compete agreements, client relationship protections, and intellectual property rights that prevent former employees from using our resources to compete against us. This was accurate but understated. Helen Brooks had spent weeks reviewing every contract David had signed over the years, identifying legal leverage that would make it nearly impossible for him to work in digital marketing within Oregon for at least 3 years. His theft of company resources and client information would likely result in criminal charges that would make him unemployable in any professional capacity. After the meeting, I spent the rest of the morning in individual conversations with department heads, reviewing their team's morale and addressing specific concerns. The consensus was cautiously optimistic. Most employees had suspected that something was wrong with David's leadership, and many were relieved that the uncertainty was over. Lisa Chen, our head of creative services, provided insight that surprised me. Rachel, I need to tell you something about Amanda that might be important. She'd been asking strange questions about client budgets and project timelines, information that wasn't relevant to her role. When I mentioned it to David, he told me to include her in budget discussions because she was being groomed for advancement. What kind of questions? Specific details about profit margins, client payment schedules, and contract renewal dates. She was also curious about which clients might be vulnerable to competitive approaches. This confirmed my suspicion that Amanda's role in David's scheme extended beyond romantic involvement. She'd been conducting corporate espionage, gathering intelligence that David could use either to leverage better deals with existing clients or to target them for his planned competing firm. Tom Bradley arrived at noon with additional evidence that painted an even more disturbing picture of David's activities. His investigation had uncovered communications between David and 2 other digital marketing firms in Seattle, discussing the possibility of sharing client lists and coordinating pricing strategies to eliminate smaller competitors. these communications could constitute antitrust violations, Tom explained as we reviewed the documents in my office. David was participating in discussions about market manipulation and price fixing. How solid is the evidence? Email records, phone recordings, and witness testimony from a former employee at one of the Seattle firms who was uncomfortable with the arrangement. This goes well beyond simple business fraud into federal criminal territory. Helen Brooks arrived shortly after Tom's briefing, carrying news that David's counterattack was already underway. He'd retained Portland's most expensive corporate litigation firm and was threatening to file multiple lawsuits challenging his termination, my acquisition of company shares, and what he characterized as a conspiracy to destroy his reputation. His lawyers are competent but not creative, Helen assessed. They're pursuing standard wrongful termination claims and attempting to challenge the validity of share transfers. What they haven't realized is that we have documentation proving David breached his fiduciary duties long before we took any action against him. The legal strategy was straightforward. David's theft of company resources and violation of partnership agreements had voided his employment contract and justified his immediate termination. His attempts to challenge my share acquisitions would fail, because every transaction had been conducted legally with willing sellers who were fully informed about the company's financial situation. More importantly, David's threats to sue for defamation or conspiracy would backfire spectacularly. Discovery processes would require him to provide testimony under oath about his financial activities, potentially exposing him to additional criminal charges. Helen was confident that his lawyers would eventually advise him to accept a settlement that minimized his legal exposure, rather than risk a trial. The afternoon brought unexpected developments that revealed the full scope of David's betrayal. Marcus Rivera's continued audit of company finances uncovered a pattern of bid rigging that had cost Sterling Digital Solutions hundreds of thousands in potential revenue. David had been sharing our proposal details with competitors, allowing them to underbid us on major contracts while splitting the savings through consulting fees. "Look at this pattern," Marcus explained, spreading financial documents across the conference table. "Every time we lost a major contract over the past 18 months, David received a consulting payment from a shell company within 30 days. The amounts roughly correspond to the profit margins on the contracts we lost." The implications were staggering. David hadn't just been stealing from Sterling Digital Solutions directly. He'd been sabotaging our competitive position to generate personal income. The Morrison Group contract was probably the only major deal he hadn't undermined, likely because he needed it to succeed for his restructuring plan to appear credible. Jennifer Kim's discovery added another layer to the conspiracy. While organizing David's former office, she'd found draft presentations that outlined plans for Sterling Digital Solutions 2.0, a new company that would have employed identical branding, similar services, and what appeared to be our entire client list. He was planning to duplicate everything, Jennifer explained, showing me the presentation materials. Same logo design, same color scheme, even similar employee titles, and organizational structure. Tom Bradley's analysis of David's computer files revealed the timeline for this plan. He'd intended to announce the restructuring in December, force me out by February, and launch his competing firm by April. Amanda would have transitioned from Vice President of Client Relations at Sterling Digital Solutions to Chief Marketing Officer at the new company, bringing our client relationships and proprietary methodologies with her. The plan was audacious in its scope and breathtaking in its betrayal. David had spent years building relationships with our clients, employees, and business partners specifically to steal them for his own benefit. Every dinner party we'd hosted, every networking event we'd attended, every professional relationship we'd cultivated had been part of his long-term strategy to destroy the company we'd built together. Late in the afternoon, I received a call from Detective Maria Santos of the Portland Police Bureau's White-Collar Crime Unit. Tom Bradley's evidence had been forwarded to law enforcement, and a formal criminal investigation was being opened into David's financial activities. Mrs. Sterling, we'd like to schedule an interview to discuss your husband's alleged embezzlement and fraud. We're also interested in the antitrust implications of his communications with other firms. Of course, Detective. Helen Brooks is my attorney, and we're prepared to cooperate fully with your investigation. We should also inform you that Mr. Sterling has retained counsel and is claiming that these allegations are part of a malicious prosecution stemming from your divorce proceedings. I'd expected this defense strategy. David would attempt to characterize the criminal investigation as vindictive action by a spurned wife rather than legitimate law enforcement response to documented crimes. It was a predictable but ultimately futile approach, given the strength of the evidence Tom had gathered. The day concluded with a conference call involving Helen Brooks, Tom Bradley, Detective Santos, and representatives from the Oregon State Bar's Ethics Committee. David's plan to steal client relationships and company resources had violated multiple professional conduct rules in addition to criminal statutes. The evidence suggests a pattern of behavior that goes back at least 3 years, the bar representative explained. If Mr. Sterling holds any professional licenses or certifications, those will be subject to disciplinary action pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. As I drove home to Lake Oswego that evening, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in less than 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I'd been the unknowing victim of an elaborate betrayal. Tonight, I was the majority owner of a thriving company, preparing to testify in multiple criminal and civil proceedings against the man I'd been married to for 12 years. The personal cost was significant. My marriage was over, my trust in intimate relationships was shattered, and my financial security depended entirely on the success of Sterling Digital Solutions under my leadership. But the professional opportunities were extraordinary. For the first time in my career, I had complete control over strategic decisions, unlimited authority to implement my vision, and freedom from the constraints of partnership with someone whose values were fundamentally incompatible with mine. David had tried to destroy my professional identity and steal the company we'd built together. Instead, his betrayal had freed me from a relationship that was limiting my potential and given me the motivation to become a better leader than I'd ever been as his equal partner. The investigation into David's crimes would continue for months, but the most important battle had already been won. Sterling Digital Solutions would survive and thrive under my leadership, while David faced the consequences of years of fraud, theft, and betrayal. Justice wasn't just being served, it was being delivered with the precision and thoroughness that David's systematic deception deserved. 3 weeks into the new year, David's legal counteroffensive began in earnest. His attorney, Richard Blackwood, from the prestigious firm of Blackwood, Sterling and Associates, filed a comprehensive lawsuit challenging every aspect of my actions. The irony of the firm's name wasn't lost on me. David had chosen lawyers whose partnership structure mirrored what ours used to be, perhaps hoping for some symbolic advantage. The lawsuit contained 7 separate claims: wrongful termination, breach of partnership agreement, conspiracy to commit fraud, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, conversion of company assets, and attempted extortion. Each claim was crafted to portray me as a vindictive ex-wife who had manufactured evidence and manipulated business relationships to destroy an innocent man's career. Helen Brooks reviewed the filing with the detached professionalism of someone who had seen every possible legal maneuver. "This is desperation masquerading as strategy," she concluded after reading all 47 pages. "Blackwood is throwing everything against the wall, hoping something will stick. The problem is that discovery will require David to explain his financial activities under oath. How long will this take to resolve? 6 months minimum, possibly longer if David wants to drag it out. But Rachel, there's something else you should know. I've been contacted by attorneys representing 2 other companies. They're investigating whether David used similar tactics at his previous positions." This was a development I hadn't anticipated. David's professional history had always seemed straightforward. steady advancement through increasingly responsible positions at respected firms. But Helen's contacts suggested a pattern of behavior that extended beyond our marriage and business partnership. What kind of tactics? Financial irregularities, inappropriate relationships with subordinates, and suspicious client losses. Nothing that resulted in criminal charges, but enough to create questions about his professional conduct. The following. Day brought another surprise in the form of Rebecca Martinez, an investigative journalist from the Portland Business Journal who had been tracking corporate fraud cases in the Pacific Northwest. She requested an interview about Sterling Digital Solutions' transition and the broader implications of executive misconduct in family-owned businesses. Mrs. Sterling, I'm working on a piece about corporate governance failures in closely held companies. Your situation illustrates several important issues about accountability and oversight. I agreed to the interview, understanding that public relations would be crucial to Sterling Digital Solutions' long-term success. Rebecca's questions were professional and well-researched, focusing on business practices rather than personal drama. How did you first become aware of potential financial irregularities at Sterling Digital Solutions? Routine administrative tasks revealed discrepancies that warranted further investigation. Once we identified concerning patterns, we engaged professional advisors to conduct a comprehensive review. What measures have you implemented to prevent similar issues in the future? We've established enhanced financial controls, mandatory disclosure requirements for all executive decisions, and independent oversight of major transactions. Transparency and accountability are now fundamental to our operations. The interview was scheduled to appear in the following week's edition, timed to coincide with the announcement of Sterling Digital Solutions' first quarter projections under my leadership. The numbers were impressive. Revenue was up 18% compared to the same period last year, and client satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs. These results weren't accidental. The removal of David's disruptive influence had allowed our talented staff to operate more efficiently and creatively. Without his micromanagement and political maneuvering, departments were collaborating more effectively and producing higher quality work. The Morrison Group had already requested to expand their contract based on the exceptional results we delivered in January. Tom Bradley's investigation continued to yield disturbing revelations about David's activities. His analysis of email records revealed that David had been in contact with a headhunter specializing in poaching employees from successful companies. The plan was to recruit key staff members from Sterling Digital Solutions to his new firm, offering them significant salary increases funded by stolen company resources. Look at this communication thread, Tom explained, displaying emails on his laptop screen. David was specifically targeting your best performers, Jennifer Kim, Robert Chen, and Marcus Rivera. He'd already made preliminary offers to all three. Did any of them respond positively? Not according to the email records. In fact, Jennifer forwarded David's approach to her personal attorney, asking about the legality of his recruitment tactics while he was still employed here. This explained why Jennifer had been so supportive during the transition. She'd been dealing with David's unethical behavior for months, understanding the situation better than I'd realized. Her loyalty to Sterling Digital Solutions wasn't just professional courtesy. It was active resistance to David's attempts to destroy the company. Marcus Rivera provided additional context when I discussed Tom's findings with him privately. Rachel, David approached me 3 times about joining his new venture. Each time he offered a substantial equity stake and promised that I'd have complete financial autonomy. When I told him I wasn't interested, he became increasingly aggressive about my lack of vision and limited ambition. Why didn't you mention this earlier? I thought he was just exploring options, maybe feeling frustrated with the partnership. Structure. I didn't realize he was actively planning to destroy Sterling Digital Solutions until Tom's investigation revealed the full scope of his activities. The week the Portland Business Journal article was published, David's public relations Strategy became apparent. He'd retained a crisis management firm to position himself as the victim of a malicious prosecution orchestrated by business rivals and a vindictive ex-wife. The narrative portrayed him as an innovative entrepreneur whose success had generated jealousy and resentment. David's first public statement appeared in a carefully orchestrated interview with a local television station known for sensationalist coverage. He appeared composed and confident, wearing the expensive suit that had always made him look successful and trustworthy. "I'm disappointed by the false allegations that have been made against me," he told the interviewer with practiced sincerity. "For 12 years, I built Sterling Digital Solutions into one of the region's most successful companies. The idea that I would steal from my own business is absurd." When asked about the evidence against him, David's response was calculated: to create doubt without providing specifics. "These so-called investigations are based on misinterpretations of legitimate business transactions. My attorneys are confident that we'll be vindicated once the facts are properly presented in court." The interview generated some sympathy for David among viewers who weren't familiar with the details of the case. Several business colleagues reached out to express support, assuming that the charges were exaggerated or politically motivated. David's charisma and professional reputation provided him with significant credibility, making the truth more difficult to accept. Helen Brooks anticipated this strategy and had prepared our response accordingly. Rather than engaging in a public relations battle, we allowed the evidence to speak for itself. Tom Bradley's investigation was meticulous and comprehensive, creating a documentary record that would be difficult to discredit regardless of David's public statements. The criminal investigation progressed steadily through February and March. Detective Santos interviewed dozens of witnesses, including current and former Sterling Digital Solutions employees, clients, and business partners. The pattern that emerged painted a picture of systematic deception that had been ongoing for years. Lisa Chen provided testimony about David's manipulation of client relationships, describing how he'd encouraged her to share confidential information about project timelines and budgets with outside parties. Sarah Mitchell revealed that David had asked her to document our proprietary methodologies and client feedback processes, ostensibly for training purposes, but actually to replicate them at his planned competing firm. Even more damaging was testimony from Amanda Walsh, who had agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for reduced charges. Her detailed account of David's plans revealed the sophisticated nature of his scheme and his callous disregard for the employees and clients who trusted him. "David told me that stealing from the company was victimless because he'd built it from nothing," Amanda testified during her deposition. "He said Rachel had never contributed anything meaningful, and that she didn't deserve an equal partnership. The plan was to force her out gradually, making it look like she was choosing to leave rather than being pushed." Amanda's cooperation provided prosecutors with inside information about David's motivations and methods that would have been impossible to obtain otherwise. Her testimony also revealed that David's theft had been more extensive than initially discovered, including the systematic overcharging of clients and the manipulation of expense reports dating back nearly 4 years. The financial impact of David's crimes was devastating. Forensic accountants hired by the district attorney's office calculated that his theft and fraud had cost Sterling Digital Solutions approximately $2 million in direct losses, plus an additional $800,000 in lost revenue from sabotaged contracts and damaged client relationships. These numbers represented more than financial damage. They represented years of hard work and sacrifice that had been stolen to fund David's personal agenda. Every late night we'd spent building the company. Every client relationship we'd carefully cultivated. Every employee we'd trained and developed had been commodified as part of David's exit strategy. In April, the Oregon State Bar filed formal disciplinary charges against David, citing violations of professional conduct rules including dishonesty, fraud, and conduct prejudicial to the administration of justice. The bar's investigation had uncovered additional evidence of David's misconduct, including his attempts to suborn perjury from Tom Bradley and his efforts to intimidate former employees who had cooperated with the criminal investigation. The disciplinary charges carried the potential for permanent disbarment, effectively ending David's ability to practice law in Oregon or any other state. While David wasn't primarily a practicing attorney, he held a law degree and bar membership that enhanced his credibility in business settings. Losing these credentials would severely damage his professional reputation and employment prospects. David's response to the escalating legal pressure was to intensify his attacks on my credibility and motivations. His attorneys filed additional motions, claiming that I had violated discovery rules by failing to disclose the full extent of my share acquisitions. They argued that my purchase of minority stakes had been conducted in secret to avoid triggering disclosure requirements and that I had misrepresented my intentions to the shareholders who sold their positions. Helen Brooks dismantled these arguments methodically, providing documentation that every share purchase had been conducted with proper legal representation and full disclosure of relevant information. The shareholders who sold their stakes had been informed about David's financial irregularities and had made informed decisions to exit their positions before the situation became public. David's attorneys are trying to create the impression that you acted deceptively, Helen explained. During one of our strategy sessions, the problem with this approach is that it requires them to argue that legitimate business transactions were somehow fraudulent, while ignoring David's actual crimes. The contrast between David's legal strategy and the evidence against him became increasingly stark as the case progressed. While his attorneys focused on procedural challenges and character assassination, prosecutors built a comprehensive case documenting systematic theft, fraud, and betrayal of fiduciary duties. In May, Sterling Digital Solutions received industry recognition that validated my leadership transition. The Portland Business Awards named us Company of the Year in the Professional Services category, citing our growth, innovation, and ethical business practices. The award ceremony provided an opportunity to demonstrate the company's stability and success under new management. Sterling Digital Solutions exemplifies the best of Portland's business community, the award presenter announced. Under Rachel Sterling's leadership, the company has achieved remarkable growth while maintaining the highest standards of professional conduct and community engagement. The recognition was particularly meaningful because it came from industry peers who understood the challenges we'd faced during the transition. Several competing firms had expected Sterling Digital Solutions to collapse after David's departure, assuming that his technical expertise and client relationships were irreplaceable. Instead, we had emerged stronger and more competitive than ever. David's reaction to our success was predictably vindictive. His attorneys filed motions claiming that my use of the Sterling name was trademark infringement and that I had stolen proprietary business methods that belonged to him personally. These claims were frivolous and easily dismissed, but they reflected David's desperation to maintain some connection to the company he'd tried to destroy. The most significant development came in June when federal prosecutors announced that they were joining the case. David's communications with competing firms about price fixing and market manipulation had attracted the attention of the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division. What had begun as a local criminal investigation was expanding into a federal case with potentially severe consequences. Federal charges carry much harsher penalties than state charges, Helen explained. If David is convicted of antitrust violations, he could face significant prison time and millions in fines. The federal investigation also had implications for the other companies David had been working with. 2 Seattle firms were now under scrutiny for their role in the price-fixing scheme, and several executives had retained counsel to protect themselves from potential charges. David's legal problems were multiplying faster than his attorneys could address them. The criminal case, civil lawsuits, bar disciplinary proceedings, and federal investigation created overlapping pressures that made it increasingly difficult for him to maintain his public facade of innocence. By summer, the weight of evidence against David had become overwhelming. Tom Bradley's investigation had been supplemented by federal resources, creating a comprehensive picture of criminal activity that spanned multiple years and jurisdictions. The case files contained thousands of documents, recorded conversations, financial records, and witness testimonies that collectively proved David's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. The question was no longer whether David would be convicted, but rather what penalties he would face, and whether he would accept a plea agreement or force prosecutors to present their case at trial. His attorneys had begun discussing potential plea negotiations, recognizing that their client's position was becoming untenable. For Sterling Digital Solutions, David's legal troubles had become a marketing advantage. Clients and prospects viewed our company as having successfully identified and eliminated corruption, demonstrating strong corporate governance and ethical leadership. The crisis that David had intended to destroy us had instead validated our integrity and competence. As I prepared for what would likely be David's final legal maneuvers, I reflected on how completely the situation had reversed from his original plan. Instead of forcing me out of the company we'd built together, David had eliminated himself while strengthening my position beyond anything I could have achieved as his partner. His betrayal had been thorough and devastating, but ultimately self-defeating. The very qualities that had made him dangerous, his ambition, intelligence, and ruthlessness, had also made him careless and overconfident. He had underestimated both my capabilities and my determination, assuming that 12 years of comfortable partnership had made me complacent and dependent. David Sterling had tried to destroy me professionally and personally, using every advantage his position and experience provided. Instead, he had created the circumstances for his own destruction and my emergence as a leader capable of extraordinary things. The reckoning came on a crisp October morning, exactly 10 months after I'd discovered David's secret bank account. Federal prosecutors had assembled their case with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, creating an unassailable narrative of fraud, theft, and betrayal that even David's expensive legal team couldn't dismantle. The courtroom in downtown Portland was packed with familiar faces from the business community, media representatives, and Sterling Digital Solutions employees who had requested time off to witness the conclusion of a saga that had consumed nearly a year of their professional lives. I sat in the front row behind the prosecution table, wearing the same black Armani dress I'd worn to our Christmas party confrontation, though now it carried different symbolism entirely. David entered the courtroom flanked by his attorneys, looking thinner and older than I remembered. The confident CEO who had once commanded every room he entered now appeared diminished, his expensive suit unable to disguise the toll that months of legal pressure had taken on his appearance and demeanor. Judge Patricia Williams called the court to order and reviewed the plea agreement that David's attorneys had finally negotiated after months of fruitless resistance. The federal charges alone carried a potential sentence of 15 years, while the state charges added another decade. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of multiple trials, David had finally accepted reality. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Williams addressed him directly, "you are pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud, embezzlement of corporate funds, violation of antitrust regulations, and breach of fiduciary duty. Do you understand that these charges carry a combined maximum sentence of 25 years in federal and state prison?" David's voice was barely audible as he responded, "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you acknowledge that you systematically stole approximately $2 million from Sterling Digital Solutions over a period of 4 years?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you acknowledge that you participated in price-fixing schemes with competing firms, violating federal antitrust regulations?" "Yes, Your Honor." Each admission felt like vindication for every sleepless night I'd spent wondering if I was paranoid, every moment of self-doubt I'd experienced while building my case against him. David Sterling, the man who had tried to convince me that I was emotionally unstable and professionally incompetent, was publicly confessing to crimes that made him a felon and a disgrace to the business community he'd once aspired to lead. The sentencing hearing that followed revealed the full scope of David's crimes in devastating detail. Federal prosecutors presented evidence that his financial fraud extended beyond Sterling Digital Solutions to include tax evasion, money laundering through offshore accounts, and fraudulent insurance claims related to company equipment that had never been damaged or stolen. Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, no relation to Amanda, despite the shared surname, methodically documented David's pattern of deception with charts, graphs, and financial records that painted an undeniable picture of systematic criminal behavior. Your Honor, the defendant's crimes weren't impulsive mistakes or momentary lapses in judgment. They represent a calculated, sophisticated scheme to defraud his business partner, his employees, his clients, and the government itself. Mr. Sterling created an elaborate web of false companies, fictitious expenses, and fraudulent documents designed to steal money and conceal his theft from detection. The prosecutors had discovered that David's planning had been even more extensive than originally suspected. He'd established multiple shell companies in different states, created fake identities for some business transactions, and even filed fraudulent tax returns claiming business losses that didn't exist. The sophistication of his scheme suggested months or years of careful preparation, making his eventual capture all the more satisfying. Amanda Walsh testified as part of her plea agreement, providing inside details about David's methods and motivations that only an accomplice could know. Her testimony was devastating, describing conversations where David had expressed contempt for his employees, his clients, and especially for me. David told me that Rachel was too stupid to notice what he was doing, Amanda testified, her voice steady but her face flushed with apparent shame. He said she was a typical suburban housewife playing at being a businesswoman, and that she'd never built anything without his help. He was convinced that he could manipulate her forever because she trusted him completely. The cruelest revelation came when Amanda described David's long-term plan for our marriage. He had intended to divorce me regardless of whether I discovered his crimes, using his financial theft to establish the competing business that would make him independently wealthy. The affair with Amanda wasn't a crime of passion, but a calculated component of his exit strategy, designed to provide him with both personal satisfaction and professional assistance. He said that staying married to Rachel was becoming a liability, Amanda continued. She was too involved in the business operations, too familiar with the clients and finances. His plan was to force her out of the company first, then divorce her when she couldn't afford a good attorney to fight for a fair settlement. This testimony explained David's increasingly distant behavior over the past several years. Every romantic gesture he'd made, every anniversary celebration, every expression of love and commitment had been performed while he was actively planning my professional and financial destruction. The marriage I'd believed was troubled but salvageable had actually been a cover for systematic betrayal. When it came time for victim impact statements, I stood to address the court with remarks I'd carefully prepared over many sleepless nights. The words came from a place of profound hurt, but also from strength I hadn't known I possessed. Your Honor, David Sterling didn't just steal money from Sterling Digital Solutions. He stolen years of my life, trust that had been built over more than a decade, and the foundation of everything I thought I knew about my marriage and business partnership. His crimes forced me to question every decision I'd made, every relationship I'd trusted, every assumption about the life we'd built together. I paused to look directly at David, who was staring at the table in front of him, apparently unable to meet my gaze. But David's betrayal also revealed strengths I didn't know I had. Running Sterling Digital Solutions without his interference has shown me what the company could become when led by someone who actually cares about the employees, the clients, and the community we serve. His crimes gave me the opportunity to become a better leader than I ever could have been as his partner. The impact on Sterling Digital Solutions employees had been significant, but ultimately positive. Marcus Rivera testified about the improved workplace culture, and increased productivity that had resulted from David's removal. Jennifer Kim described how creative projects that had been stifled by David's controlling management style were now flourishing under collaborative leadership. Removing David from the company was like removing a cancer, Marcus told the court. The organization immediately became healthier, more innovative, and more successful. Our employees are more engaged, our clients are happier, and our financial performance has exceeded all projections. The numbers supported his testimony. Sterling Digital Solutions had grown by 35% in the 10 months since David's departure, adding 42 new employees and winning contracts with major clients who had previously been reluctant to work with us. The Morrison Group had expanded their partnership and recommended us to 3 other companies, generating millions in new revenue. Judge Williams listened carefully to all testimony before announcing David's sentence. The federal charges alone resulted in 8 years in prison, while the state charges added another 4 years. The sentences would run concurrently, meaning David would serve 8 years total, but he would also pay restitution of $1.8 million plus penalties and interest. Mr. Sterling, your crimes represent a profound betrayal of trust that affected not only your business partner and employees, but the integrity of the business community itself. Your actions were calculated, sophisticated, and motivated by greed rather than necessity. The sentence I'm imposing reflects the seriousness of your crimes and the need to deter others from similar conduct. David was immediately taken into custody, his brief moment of freedom ending as federal marshals led him away in handcuffs. He didn't look back at the courtroom or acknowledge the wife he had betrayed so thoroughly. Amanda Walsh received a sentence of 18 months plus community service, her cooperation with prosecutors earning her significant consideration despite her active participation in David's crimes. The civil lawsuits were resolved through settlements that recovered most of Sterling Digital Solutions' financial losses. David's personal assets, including his share of our Lake Oswego home, were liquidated to pay restitution. The house we'd shared for 8 years was sold to satisfy his debts, though I'd already moved into a downtown Portland condominium that better reflected my new identity as an independent businesswoman. The Oregon State Bar's disciplinary action resulted in David's permanent disbarment, ensuring that he could never practice law in any jurisdiction. The federal conviction would also make it nearly impossible for him to obtain professional employment in finance, consulting, or management once he completed his prison sentence. Sterling Digital Solutions thrived in ways that would have been impossible under David's leadership. Without his ego and controlling tendencies limiting our growth, the company became more innovative, more collaborative, and more profitable. We opened a second office in Seattle, hired specialists in emerging technologies, and developed service offerings that positioned us as leaders in digital transformation consulting. The Morrison Group partnership evolved into something far more valuable than the original contract. Their satisfaction with our work led to introductions with other major retailers, creating a network of relationships that generated consistent revenue and referrals. James Morrison joined our board of directors, providing strategic guidance that helped us navigate rapid expansion while maintaining operational excellence. 6 months after David's sentencing, I was invited to speak at the Pacific Northwest Business Leaders Conference about corporate governance, ethical leadership, and crisis management. The presentation drew standing ovations from an audience of CEOs and senior executives who recognized the courage required to expose and prosecute such systematic fraud. Leadership isn't about avoiding difficult decisions, I told the audience. It's about making the right decisions even when they're personally painful and professionally risky. David Sterling's crimes could have destroyed Sterling Digital Solutions if we'd tried to cover them up or minimize their impact. Instead, we chose transparency, accountability, and justice, which ultimately made our company stronger. The speaking engagement led to consulting opportunities with other companies facing leadership crises or governance challenges. I developed expertise in organizational transformation, helping businesses rebuild trust and effectiveness after experiencing betrayal or misconduct. The work was personally fulfilling and professionally lucrative, adding a new dimension to my career that I never would have discovered without David's betrayal forcing me to reinvent myself. Tom Bradley's investigative firm received numerous referrals from attorneys and companies, impressed by the thoroughness and professionalism he'd demonstrated in uncovering David's crimes. His reputation as a corporate fraud specialist was enhanced by the successful prosecution, leading to contracts with Fortune 500 companies and federal agencies. Helen Brooks was elected to the Oregon State Bar's Board of Governors, partly based on her handling of the Sterling case. Her expertise in corporate fraud and partnership disputes made her one of the most sought-after attorneys in the Pacific Northwest, with clients ranging from family businesses to multinational corporations. The employees who had remained loyal to Sterling Digital Solutions during the crisis were rewarded with profit-sharing bonuses, expanded responsibilities, and career advancement opportunities that reflected their contributions to the company's success. Marcus Rivera was promoted to Chief Financial Officer with an equity stake that made him a true partner in the business. Jennifer Kim became Creative Director with authority over all design and marketing initiatives. Amanda Walsh served her sentence and left Oregon upon release, relocating to a different state where her involvement in the Sterling case was less well known. She found employment with a small marketing firm, but never regained the career trajectory she'd been pursuing when she became involved with David's scheme. 2 years after David's imprisonment, I received a letter from him written from the federal correctional facility where he was serving his sentence. The letter was rambling and self-pitying, attempting to justify his actions and minimize his responsibility for the consequences that followed. Rachel, I hope you understand that everything I did was motivated by my vision for what Sterling Digital Solutions could become, he wrote in handwriting that had deteriorated during his incarceration. My methods may have been questionable, but my intentions were always focused on building something great. I never meant to hurt you personally, and I hope someday you can forgive me for the mistakes I made. The letter revealed that David still didn't understand the fundamental nature of his crimes or the impact they'd had on everyone around him. He characterized systematic theft and betrayal as mistakes and questionable methods, unable or unwilling to acknowledge the deliberate cruelty of his actions. His request for forgiveness seemed motivated more by self-pity than genuine remorse. I didn't respond to the letter. David Sterling had forfeited the right to my emotional energy when he chose to steal from our company and betray our marriage. My focus was on the future of Sterling Digital Solutions and the community of employees, clients, and partners who had supported me through the most challenging period of my professional life. The company continued to grow and evolve, eventually expanding to 3 offices and more than 200 employees. We developed a reputation for ethical business practices, innovative solutions, and exceptional client service that made us the preferred partner for companies throughout the Pacific Northwest. The Morrison Group relationship led to national contracts that established Sterling Digital Solutions as a significant player in the digital marketing industry. 5 years after David's conviction, Sterling Digital Solutions was acquired by a national consulting firm for $48 million. Providing financial security for all employees and substantial returns for shareholders. I remained as president of the Portland division while also serving as a senior vice president for the parent company, overseeing their expansion into digital transformation services. The acquisition validated everything I'd believed about Sterling Digital Solutions' potential when David had been systematically undermining our growth. Without his theft, sabotage, and destructive leadership, the company had achieved success that exceeded even my most optimistic projections. His crimes had been intended to destroy my professional future. Instead, they had eliminated the only obstacle preventing me from reaching my full potential. David Sterling had humiliated me at our company Christmas party, announcing my termination and divorce in front of everyone we'd worked with for years. He'd intended that moment to be the culmination of his systematic betrayal, the public demonstration, of his complete victory over the wife he'd deceived and the partner he'd robbed. Instead, that Christmas party became the stage for his own destruction and my emergence as a leader capable of extraordinary achievements. His arrogance and cruelty had provided me with the perfect opportunity to reveal his crimes and claim control of the company he'd tried to steal. The humiliation David had planned for me became his own public downfall, witnessed by the same audience he'd hoped would see my defeat. Justice wasn't just served, it was delivered with the precision and completeness that his systematic betrayal deserved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.